ॐ नमो नारायणाय ॐ नमो नारायणाय
Asmad Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Parama Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So we're continuing with our discussion of Vedartha Sangraha by Ramanuja, and we're reading the version by Rajagopala Iyengar. And we have up until now talked about Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. Now we're in the introduction stage, so we haven't actually come to the book yet. We're going to discuss Sri Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita. Now that we understand a little bit about Advaita, we're going to look at Sri Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita. So we're going to look at Tattva, Hita, and Purushartha, the principles, the means, and the goal, according to Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. We now know what it is according to Advaita Vedanta. Let's look at Vishishtadvaita. So on Tattva, after this preliminary study of Sri Shankaracharya's views on Tattva, Purushartha, and Upaya also means Hita, means the means, right? The principles, the goal, and the means. In the study of Advaita philosophy, we may proceed to the study of Sri Ramanuja's views on these points as set forth in his Vedartha Sangraha. The reader would have noticed that the Advaitin, the monist, right, the Mayavadi, approaches the inquiry into these points in two ways. First, through the Shrutis or revelation, the different phrases and ideas from the Upanishads, which he considers as superior even to sense perception, right, inference and reason, and afterwards, secondly, to reason, inference, or yukti, right? So he has those two things that he really looks at. Number one, he gets his knowledge from the Upanishads, and then by reasoning these aspects from the Upanishads. Sri Ramanuja adopts the same method in his approach. Taking the evidence of the Shrutis first, what do we find? In some of the Shrutis, or passages in the Upanishads, which describe Brahman as being without imperfections, without qualities or attributes, without change or modification, without activity, and as being of the nature of pure consciousness or jnana and bliss, ananda, in the Kathopanishad and Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, it is said that there is no such thing as the many or plurality, right? These and other such texts deny the existence of the many. So in Kathopanishad, Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, it says that there's just one thing. There are other Shrutis, there are other statements in the other Upanishads, however, which say of Brahman, he is omniscient, he is all-knowing. So that's in the Mundaka Upanishad. By his mere will, he creates the universe. He gives names and forms to all things. He is free from faults, from old age, from death, from sorrow, from hunger and thirst, and is all perfect and omnipotent. Means all powerful. That is given in Chandogya Upanishad. These Shrutis deny the existence of faults and imperfections and affirm the existence in him of positive qualities and attributes like omniscience, all-knowing, and omnipotence, all-powerful. A third set of passages in the Shrutis declares, right? A third set of passages declares, right? So now, just to back up a minute, so we have those passages which say that there's no plurality. So remember that what we were saying is plurality can also mean that there are no attributes. There is only one substance and it has no attributes. That's what the Advaitins say. So then he says, secondly, okay, in the Kathopanishad and Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, there's no plurality, there's only one thing. But at the same time, in this Mundaka Upanishad, and Chandogya, right? It talks about that there are many, the Lord or the Supreme has many attributes. So those things mean that there's many, right? There's also many. There's one, but there's also many. So we have what's called Abheda Shrutis, right? So Upanishadic statements that say that there is no plurality, that there's only one, and Beta Shrutis, Upanishadic statements which say that there is many. And then there's a third type. The third set of passages in the Shrutis declare all this is Brahman because all things are created by him, sustained by him, and merged into him. That is a very famous statement from Taittiriya Upanishad. It is actually a definition given of Brahman giving in Taittiriya Upanishad. So it says Yato va imani bhutani jayante yena jatani jivanti yet prayantya bisham bishanti ti. Right? That from which everything emanates, that by which everything is maintained, and that into which everything enters, that is Brahman. Okay, so that is very famous from Taittiriya Upanishad. So all this is Brahman because all things are created by him, sustained by him, and merged into him. All this has Brahman as its Atma. All this has Brahman as its Atma, as its soul. So Brahman is the soul of all this, right? This is leading us up to the Shariri Bhava of idea of Ramanuja, right? So this is also given in the Shrutis. So the third type of Shrutis says both that there is one Brahman, but also that there is many attributes of Brahman. So these affirm the world and with all its varied contents as creation of Brahman, and also at the same time their oneness with him. So we have the Upanishadic statements which confirm the oneness, the Upanishadic statements which confirm the difference or the many, and the Upanishadic statements that confirm both, which are called Abheda Shrutis, Beta Shrutis, and Ghatika Shrutis. The Ghatika Shrutis say both. So there are, however, other Shrutis which say these affirm the world in all its varied contents as a creation of Brahman and also their oneness with him. There are, however, other Shrutis which say man can attain immortality by realizing that the individual self is different from the Supreme Self, which inspires and directs it. So that's also stated. Having understood the difference, again, another quote, having understood the difference between the self that enjoys and experiences, the object that is enjoyed or experienced, and also the Supreme Self that directs everything, etc. That is from the Svetashvatara Upanishad. He has all things under his control and rules over all, from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And again, another quote, he is the Lord of the world. He is the supreme ruler among all rulers and is the supreme deity over all deities. These Shrutis state that Brahman is different from all else and that he rules over all. Other Shrutis again declare as follows. He has entered into all beings and rules them from within as their self or soul. This Atma is the inner ruler, immortal. The earth is his body. The waters are his body. Light is his body. The soul or the jiva is his body. He is the inner self that controls all from within. This is all in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. These passages state that the relationship that exists between Brahman and the world, consisting of sentient and non-sentient beings, right, the souls and matter, right, is that which exists between the soul and the body. It's the same sort of relationship that exists between the soul and the physical body, your soul and your body. When there are such apparent inconsistencies in the Shrutis, right, they seem contradictory. Regarding the essential nature of Brahman, how are we to explain them? One explanation might suggest itself at first sight, namely that the Shrutis are composed by different seers at different times, and that these seers held divergent views about the nature of Brahman. But none of the orthodox commentators on the Upanishads or Brahma Sutras would subscribe to this view. Neither Shankara, nor Ramanuja, nor Bhaskara, nor Madhvacharya, nor any others. So there are no commentators, there are no acharyas who have described these statements in the Upanishads as being from totally different schools of thought, different philosophies. They are all supposed to be one consistent thought or school of, which is called Vedanta. They all agree in thinking that the Shrutis are not divided amongst themselves and that all of them declare the same truth without any inconsistency or contradiction. The Shrutis, they say, are not the work of any human or divine being and are eternal revelations of tattva, principle, purushartha, the goal, and hita or upaya, the means. Their authority is unquestioned. If inconsistencies or contradictions are noticed, they are only apparent and due to wrong interpretations of the meaning of the passages. So how Advaitins explain away these apparent inconsistencies and contradictions has already been indicated. We talked about some of the strange ideas that the Advaitins have, right? And their ways that they try to explain why there are differences in the Upanishads. According to them, the Shrutis describe two Brahmans. According to the Advaitins, it describes two Brahmans: the higher para or supreme Brahman without attributes, without activity, without change or modification, and the lower apara Brahman who has attributes and activities mentioned in some passages, right? So we know that they talk about the higher Brahman as being nirguna Brahman, without any qualities or attributes, and saguna Brahman, which is also known by them as Ishvara, which could be Ganesh or Shiva or Brahma or Vishnu or some devata, usually known as Vishnu actually, but as the Ishvara, as the supreme controller, but with qualities. That is called Saguna Brahman, which they say is on a Vyavaharika level, the lower level, which we discussed, and not on the Paramartika or the upper, the highest level. The highest level is actually without any qualities. Okay, so this lower or upper Brahman who has attributes and activities mentioned in some passages. This lower Brahman is Ishvara, who is called the ruler of the world, its director, and so on. But he is unreal in the ultimate reckoning. Only pure attributeless Nirguna Brahman is real. Another explanation of theirs is that the passages that assign attributes and activities to Brahman express the prima facie or the principal view, the first view, right, which is rejected by passages which deny attributes and activities. The way that Vedanta philosophy is discussed is usually that there's what we call a prima facie view, that there's somebody puts up a proposal and they give a view, but that view later on is contradicted and is destroyed by the Siddhanta or the final conclusion. So not the final conclusion, but the first thought, the first view, the prima facie view, right, is rejected by the passages that deny attributes and activities. So what they're saying is that there are these two views, and the view about that Brahman has attributes and is in his plurality, right, is rejected because it is overcome by these other passages which say he has no attributes. The passages which deny attributes are later than the passages which affirm and therefore sublate or supersede them. That is what the Advaitins will say. That's another thing that they say. So what are they? They have two arguments. The first argument is, oh, the Upanishads are talking about two different Brahmans. They're talking about Paramartika Nirguna Brahman and Vyavaharika Saguna Brahman or Ishvara. And then they say that's their first argument. And then the second argument is, oh, the different passages, the first passages that you read talk about attributes, but the second passages come along and supersede those. So we have the Beta Shrutis, which talk about plurality of, right, that Brahman has many attributes or many pluralities, right? And that is sublated, or that is suppressed or superseded by the statements which come along afterwards, which talk only of oneness or Brahman without any qualities at all, Nirguna Brahman. So Sri Ramanuja is a realist. What do we mean by realist? A realist is a person who believes in reality, believes in the reality of the universe, right? Because Shankara doesn't believe in the reality of the universe. He believes it's an illusion. He says, Jagat Mithya, right? His slogan is, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Only Brahman is truth. Only Brahman is truth, the Nirguna Brahman. And this world is false. Jagat, the universe, is Mithya, false. So to him, Brahman, Ishvara, or God, right? Brahman, Ishvara, or God is real. So also the Jivatman and the individual self or soul, right? To Ramanuja. But to Shankara, Ishvara, Nirguna Brahman is real to Shankara. But Ishvara or Saguna Brahman, the Vyavaharika Brahman, that is not real. Neither is the Jivatman real, the individual self or soul. It's not real according to the Advaitin. So according to Ramanuja, all these things are real. He's a realist. That's what it means by saying he's a realist. So these souls are infinite in number and not one. So we remember we understood in a previous discussion that there is a school of Advaita Vedanta. There's a monistic school which believes that there is only one jiva. There is only one living being. Eka Jiva Vada, right? Which is a form of Advaita Vedanta. It's not the only form. There's several different forms of Advaita Vedanta. So these souls are infinite in number, right? According to Ramanuja, and not one. Further, matter or prakriti, with all of its modifications and evolutes, is real. So matter is also real. All the different elements are real. The universe is real in all its different shapes and sizes and varieties. So there are three reals, according to Ramanuja, three things which are real, three principles or tattvas, right? Brahman or Ishvara can be used either way. You can say Brahman or Ishvara. You don't have to make a distinction between them, because we don't make a distinction between Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman, or Paramartika or Vyavaharika. That's not a distinction that Ramanuja makes. There is only God, right? Brahman, the supreme Brahman, Sriman Narayana. You can also call him Brahman. You can also call him Ishvara. So there's that principle. Then there is the soul or the self, jiva, which is innumerable, which is infinite. There are infinite jivas, different jivas, right? Speaking of it as a class, when we say jiva here, we're talking about a class of beings, right? There's God, there's the jivas, the souls, right? The atmans. There's the paramatman and the jivatman, right? And then we have prakriti. Prakriti means matter, right? Which includes all of the different forms of matter, like that, all the universes. So these are the three reals. These are the three reals which makes Ramanuja a realist. He believes that these three are real. Each one of them is real in the sense of permanent, right? Like the Advaitins talk about, a real thing should be permanent, right? So speaking of the first tattva, namely Brahman or Ishvara, Ramanuja is emphatic in declaring that the Shrutis, the Upanishads, do not speak of the existence of two Brahmans, a higher and a lower, right? So where do we find that? The Advaitins say that there's a Paramartika Nirguna Brahman and a Vyavaharika Ishvara Saguna Brahman, right? But where is that ever stated? Where is that stated in the Shrutis? So the first question to the Advaitin is, you say that these two exist, but where is it actually stated? So the Shrutis, Ramanuja says, is emphatic in declaring that the Shrutis don't speak. They do not speak of the existence of two different Brahmans, a higher and a lower. And that one Brahman, the supreme being, which is described in the Shrutis, has infinite auspicious qualities. So he says that Brahman, that the one Brahman, the supreme being, which is described in the Shrutis, has infinite auspicious qualities, which is Ananta Kalyana Gunas. Ananta, infinite, Kalyana, auspicious qualities, right? So when Sri Vaishnavas or followers of Ramanuja say nirguna, when we say nirguna means without qualities. When we describe the Supreme Lord, whenever it's described in Scripture that the Supreme Lord is nirguna, we say it means nirguna means without any bad qualities, without any detrimental qualities, with only infinite auspicious qualities and no opposing qualities to those. So that's what nirguna means to us. Those passages which seemingly deny attributes in Brahman and call it nirguna, deny the existence in Brahman only of the three qualities ascribed to Prakriti, namely Sattvam, Rajas, and Tamas. So there are three modes in material nature: goodness, ordinary passion, and ordinary ignorance, right, which are material qualities. And therefore, when we say nirguna, we mean Brahman is nirguna because he doesn't have these material qualities of goodness, passion, and ignorance in him. He doesn't have those material qualities. What is denied is only the existence in Brahman of faults and imperfections. How else could we explain such attributes as omniscience, omnipotence, all-knowingness, all-powerfulness, right, which are ascribed to Brahman in the very passages that deny which according to the Advaitin deny a number of attributes, right? So the Advaitin says that the same passages say that God has no attributes at all, but the same passages say, the same Upanishads say, that he has qualities like all-knowingness and all-powerfulness, or omniscience and omnipotence. So how can he have these attributes, these wonderful attributes of knowing everything and being all-powerful, and at the same time have no attributes? So the word no attributes in that passage must mean no bad attributes, because it's already been said in the same passage that he has those good attributes. So that's a proof. Right, nirguna means without blemishes, faults, or imperfections. In reply to the Advaitin, who states that the passages in which Brahman is said to possess attributes express the prima facie, the principle, the first view, the propositional view, and that they are superseded or sublated, right, by passages that deny attributes, Ramanuja says to that charge by the Advaitin, all the knowledge concerning the nature of Brahman has to come to us only from scripture or shruti. We can have no valid knowledge of it from any other source. It would indeed be funny if the shrutis first said that Brahman had qualities and activities, only to deny it afterwards. Then the shruti itself the Upanishads would be contradicting themselves. Why should the shruti state at first something which is not true and then deny its truth? Right? Why say something and then deny it? Right. The Advaitin may ask, but how do you explain those passages which state that Brahman can be described only in negative terms? Neti neti, not this, not this. So do they not mean that Brahman is without attributes, and that it is not this, not that, and so on? So Ramanuja would reply. Ramanuja answers the question as follows. The Shruti, which says neti neti, not this, really means that Brahman's nature, his essential nature or swarupa, right, his own form, right, and qualities, his swarupa and qualities are incapable of adequate or complete description. And that what is at all possible is only a partial or fragmentary description, right? So when you say Brahman is not this, what it really means is we cannot fully describe Brahman, right? What the Shruti states by saying not this, is that Brahman is not to be considered to be as being limited to this or that. It is not limited to this or that, but that it is these and an infinite of others as well, which defy adequate enumeration. The passage in question is in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 4.3.6. It is said there that Brahman is twofold, which is said which it has a tangible form and is also formless. Then follows the statement neti neti, which means iti na iti na. So na iti or iti na. Not this only, not this only. So we will translate neti neti as not this only, not this only. So not only this, not only this. The author of the Brahma Sutras has explained the meaning of this text or Shruti in the Brahma Sutras 3:2-21 as follows. What is denied is, of course, that Brahman is only this much. Therefore, Brahman is much more than what we can describe. Therefore, the Shruti proceeds further to describe Brahman. What is said in the Shruti after neti neti is that there is nothing superior to Brahman, and that it is the real or the satyam of all reals. Satyasya. Satyasya means of truth. Satyam means truth. The truth of truth is satyasya satyam. Right? So that's what it's talking about here. Satyasya satyam is mentioned in the Upanishad. So that means the real of reals. The principle of the principles. For the other principles being Prakriti and the Jiva, right? The souls and the universe. For the individual souls are real, and Brahman is real among all reals. Brahman is the principle amongst all principles, all these other principles. The individual self is called real because in its essential nature, it does not undergo any change or modification like matter or Prakriti, right? So the individual soul doesn't go through any change, right? It stays the same always, like that. So it's also called real, like that. We'll talk about Prakriti in a minute, perhaps. But God never changes, the soul never changes. It's essential nature. The Advaitin will now ask, but what do you say to the passage that says there is no such thing here that is in Brahman as many or plurality? Nana. Nana means many, various. So does it not clearly say that only Brahman exists and that there is nothing else, no other real, and not even any attributes within the self? Ramanuja's answer is to this effect. This idea that there is no such thing in Brahman as the many, Nana, is found in the Katha Upanishad 2 and in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 6. Immediately after this statement, the Shruti declares that Brahman has all things under his control. Sarvasya Vasi. So Vasi, all things, he's the Vasi, right? The controller of Sarvasya, of everything. And that he rules over all. Ishana, Sarvasya Ishana. Ishan, he's the Isha, or the ruler of Sarvasya, of everything. In the face of these latter passages, how can it be maintained that Brahman has no attributes at all, while rulership and control are ascribed to him? Right? It may be said by the Advaitin that the passage in question denies the existence of anything other than Brahman. To this, Ramanuja would reply as follows. That is certainly not the meaning. To decide what the true interpretation of the text is, we should go back to a consideration of the apparently divergent Shrutis quoted before, some seemingly denying the existence of anything other than Brahman, some stating that all this is Brahman, because it is created and sustained by Brahman and is merged into it. Remember I said from Taittiriya Upanishad? He didn't mention it was from Taittiriya. Yatova imani bhutani jayanti, right? Etc. Which seem to recognize the reality of the world with its sentient and insentient beings, and others stating that Brahman is different from the individual self, which enjoys or experiences, and from matter, which is the object of such enjoyment and experience. Maybe we should say that again, right? To decide, Ramanuja is saying, to decide what the true interpretation of the text is, we should go back to the consideration of the apparently divergent Shrutis, the different Shrutis quoted before. Some seemingly denying the existence of anything other than Brahman, and some stating that all this is Brahman because it is created and sustained by Brahman and is merged back into it, which seems to recognize the reality of the world with its sentient and non-sentient beings, and others stating that Brahman is different from the individual self, which enjoys and experiences, and from matter, which is the object of such enjoyment and experience. Right? So all of this is stated in the Shrutis. What are we to make of these apparent inconsistent statements? Right? So this is told to the Advaitin. What can the Advaitin say to this? The Advaitin flatly declares that the Shrutis, which speak of the reality of the world and of differences between Brahman and the Jivas on the one hand, and Brahman and matter on the other hand, are not valid, and that only those passages that, like this existed, my dear, as Sat, or eternality without a second, are authoritative. So when faced with all these contradictory statements in the Shrutis, seemingly contradictory according to the Advaitin, he just denies those. He just says, no, we only accept the Abheda Shrutis. We do not accept the Beta Shrutis. We only accept the texts which talk about oneness and not the texts that talk about any sort of plurality as being authoritative. This would imply rejection of all the passages in the Upanishads that speak of the jiva, the soul, and of prakriti or matter, and of the attributes of Brahman, the supreme, as being real. These passages are said by the Advaitin to be rejected. Similarly, if we take the Svatashvatara Upanishad passage cited before, which says that Brahman, the jiva, and prakriti are real and different from one another, as valid and authoritative, if we take that as valid and authoritative, we shall have to reject the authority of those texts which declare that Brahman is the only reality and that there is no such thing as the many. Is there any interpretation or view which would enable us to explain and reconcile, right, how to rationalize these apparently divergent Shrutis without rejecting any of them as being invalid? So this is the problem. Both the Advaitin and the Dvaitin, both the Shankara and Madhva, they have to say that certain sections of the Vedas cannot be accepted the way of the Upanishads cannot be accepted the way they are. Ramanuja says, however, there is an explanation which can reconcile or rationalize that all of these passages are correct. At the same time, we can accept all of them. Ramanuja says, yes, there is, and this key would be, which would reconcile all the texts, is found in the Brihad Aranyaka text, usually called the Antaryami Brahmanam. Right? So there's this Antaryami Brahmanam, right, which is from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. Now, what does it say? It says that the world of matter or non-sentient things, insentient things, is the body of Brahman, the Supreme, and that Brahman is its soul. Likewise, it says that all sentient beings, like the jivas, the individual souls, are also Brahman's body, and that Brahman being their soul. Their relationship between body and soul existing between the world and Brahman is the key doctrine of Sri Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita system. According to it, and where does it come from? Again, it comes from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, otherwise known as, that particular part is called the Antaryami Brahmana. Antaryami means the inner super soul or Paramatman. The Antaryami Brahman, right? The Paramatman or the soul, right? The inner soul, the inner super soul. The inner super soul of the universe, right? And the souls is the Supreme, Sriman Narayana. That's the idea. right? So this comes from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So this is the key to understanding, the key doctrine to understanding Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita system. According to it, Brahman has chit and achit. What is chit? Chit is knowledge. Chit is the soul. And achit is well, the opposite of knowledge or opposite of consciousness, which means dull matter or jada, this universe, right? So we have jiva or jivatman and prakriti, right? Which are as real as Brahman itself as his body. So these two principles, the universe of matter and the living beings, the infinite number of jivatma souls, the chit, the achit and the chit, right? These are also real. They are real in the sense that they are the body of Brahman. They're the body, and he is their soul, their inner self, controlling and directing them from within. If this central doctrine of Sri Ramanuja's system, which is explicitly stated in the Antaryami Brahmanam, is accepted, it would enable us to reconcile all the divergent texts referred to before without rejecting the validity of any of them. Since Brahman is the soul or inner self of all, Brahman with chit and achit, or the sentient and insentient, the sentient and non-sentient things, as his body, forms a unity or a single real. There is indeed nothing else, for the world with all its variety is included in Brahman as its body. This body is really an attribute or prakara also means an attribute, of the soul. This body is a prakara or an attribute of the soul. And we often speak of the soul of a man with its prakara, the body, as a single unit or a single thing or unity, right? We often refer to people as this is you, meaning your mind, your body, and your soul all together. This is one thing, right? We see that as one thing like that. So we often refer to it like that. So that's that in the sense when we talk about Brahman, we're talking about Brahman, which exists, but there are three aspects to that Brahman. There's the soul, there's God, there's the material universe, and there's the living beings, the jivatmans. But all of them together are Brahman. So in the same way, Brahman is, according to the Shrutis, a single reality, a single real, a single principle. And there is nothing else. For all else form the body of Brahman. For all else form the body of Brahman, which is inseparable from it, and may therefore be included as one with the Swarupa, the essential nature, or the substantive part of Brahman, which has for its attributive amsa or part, the world of chit and achit, the world of the jivas, the jivatmans, the souls, the infinite souls, and achit matter. So thus the texts that, in the opinion of the Advaitin, teach unity find an easy explanation without denying the reality of the world and calling it an illusion. At the same time, the body of man is different from his soul. So also the world of chit and achit, which is the body of Brahman, is different from the inner soul or self of all, namely the Swarupa of Brahman, the Supreme Lord Sriman Narayana. And the Svetashvatara and other texts which speak of the differences between Ishvara, right, Sriman Narayana, right, the individual self, Jivatman, and matter or achit, right, or prakriti, are easily explained as being consistent with this Shruti called the Antaryami Brahmana, right? Thus, Brahman with chit and achit as its prakaras or attributes is the only reality, and Ramanuja's system, therefore, is a type of Advaita or monism because it believes in the oneness of Brahman. Brahman is one, but Brahman itself is understood to be Chidachit Vishishta Brahman. Vishishta means specifically that Brahman which has as its attributes Chit and Achit. That is the Brahman which we believe in. Right. So the student of Vedanta is likely to raise an objection to what has been said about the world being the body of Brahman, Ishvara, or God. The body of the jiva is usually said to be due to the past karma and to be the cause of all the ills of samsara, repeated birth and death, right? If Brahman has a body like ourselves, so Ramanuja is saying Brahman has a body, and that body is Chidachid Vishishta. That is these attributes of Brahman are the Jivatmans, the infinite souls, and matter, the universe. So then the student of Vedanta will say to the Sri Vaishnava, he'll say, well, if we know our experience in Vedanta is that we have a soul, or there's a Jivatman, and we also have a body, both gross and subtle, and that body, gross and subtle, comes about by our karmas from previous births, right? For all the ills of samsara, right? That we have this different particular body. So then he asks this question: if Brahman has a body like ourselves, does it not follow, too, that he is subject to karma and the subsequent sufferings of samsara? That's a good question. If you're saying that Brahman has a body, right, and even though the body is the souls and matter of the universe, right, doesn't Brahman therefore have a body just like we have a body? Ramanuja would answer this question as follows: Brahman's body, or Srimad Narayana's body, is not the result of any past karma of his. In order to understand this aright, we should first define what is meant by the term body. So maybe the student of Vedanta is thinking of the body in a different way than Ramanuja is thinking of body. So now we're going to explain what is Ramanuja's definition of body, because he just said Brahman has a body, and that body is Chidachit Vishishta, means that it is one, but it has attributes of the souls and matter, right? So let's explain what he means by body then. What does it mean? Sharira shariri. So what does sharira mean? And what does shariri mean? Shariri is the controller of the soul of the body, and sharira is the body. Okay, so what do these terms mean? What does body mean? The body is sometimes defined as composed of matter and as being the seat of the senses and of pains and pleasures and pains. But this is not a proper definition, right? So don't think of, when we talk about Brahman's body, we're not talking about some seat of the senses, material senses and pains and pleasures. We're not talking about that. This is not a proper definition. It's very important to understand this. The body of a sentient being is something that is supported and controlled by its soul or self, right? So that's part of the real definition: supported and controlled by the soul. So what is a body? It is something which is supported and controlled by something else, right? In this case, my body is controlled and supported by my soul. If my soul leaves my body deteriorates. So the body of a sentient being is something that is supported and controlled by its soul or self, and that exists solely for fulfillment of the purposes of the soul and the self. What is my body doing? My body is acting the way my soul wants it to act. I think, I feel, I will, and I get things done, or I don't get things done, but I desire to get things done, and therefore my body moves and does different things according to my direction. Right? The soul, the Atman. The Atman is a doer, and therefore it affects the body like that. Okay? So it's only for the purpose of my soul, right? The body. The body is an extension of the soul. The soul is using the material body to do different actions, right? And to feel different sensations or whatever, to experience different things, right? So it's for the soul is not only the supporter and controller of the body, but also the body is meant to fulfill the purposes of the soul and the self. This is the real definition of what a body is. So in this definition is a true definition, and its truth cannot be denied. The question of Brahman suffering from samsara owing to the possession of a body will not arise. So if we simply say the souls and the world, the material world of matter and the universes, and the infinite number of Jivatman souls, right? These form the body of Brahman, or the body of Srimad Narayana, the body of God, right? So in what sense is he the soul? In what sense is he the Antaryami Brahman, right? In the Antaryami, the inner soul, or in the sense that he is the controller and the supporter of all these others. Without him, he controls everything and he supports everything, all insentient and all sentient things, all matter and all souls, right? And though that matter and that souls are simply exist for the purpose of God, only for the purpose of God, only for his purpose. They are his eternal servants, they are his eternal slaves. Everything is for his pleasure, is for his purpose only, right? So in that sense, the souls in the universe are the body of God, like that. So if we make that definition of what a body actually is, right? Okay, so the Shrutis will say that Brahman is without change or modification, nirvikara, right? Nirvikara. Are easily explained in Vishishtadvaita, these Shrutis, right? Because the Swarupa, or the substantive part, the essential part, or Vishesha Amsa, the special, Vishesha, special part, Amsa of Brahman, never undergoes any change and remains ever, right? The Supreme Brahman never remains ever Satyam, Jnanam, and Anantam. Remember, we had that statement in the Shrutis. Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. So Brahman has these qualities or attributes. Satyam, truth or eternality, right? Jnanam, knowledge, and Anantam, right? Infinity, right? So reality, consciousness, and infiniteness, right? As well as we talked about before, Anandam, also bliss, also. So an attributive part or amsa of Brahman, which is its body, are the two reals, chit and achit, right? So how much does this statement here in the Upanishads saying that Brahman is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, how does that refer also to these others? These alone undergo changes. So it's not the essential part of Brahman, the supreme Brahman or Ishvara, Sriman Narayana, who undergoes any changes, but these other reals, the other two reals, Chit and Achit, these alone undergo changes. The Achit portion or Prakriti or matter, which is in such a subtle state or Shukshma Dasa in Pralaya before creation, at the time of dissolution or destruction of the material universes, the matter inside those universes goes back into a form, a subtle form, goes back into a subtle form. We talk about pradhana, we talk about the conglomerate of material elements before they became separated out. It goes into a subtle form called Shukshmadasa after Pralaya, after the destruction of the material universe, but it's never destroyed completely, right? The universe is never completely destroyed. It still exists in a very subtle form called Shukshmadasa. So this is then it is created again. It is created again. So before creation, it's in that, and it's a cycle of creation and destruction like this, and maintenance in the middle. So there's this Shristi, Stiti, Laya or Pralaya, and then another Shristi. Okay, so now creation. So the Chit portion of Prakriti, the Achit portion, the matter portion of Prakriti, right, which is in the subtle state or Shukshmadasa in Pralaya, that is before creation, that it can hardly be said to exist at all. It's so subtle. Becomes modified in the creation or the Shristi into Shtula or gross matter, and evolves into various forms like earth, water, fire, air, ether, akash, which is ether, and the different senses, either the knowledge acquiring senses or the working senses, right? Which are called karmendriyas, gyanendriyas and kamendriyas, right? And we see them in the pot, wood, cloth, metal, the bodies of animals, and so on, right? So these things all come out of one another. That is the process which is described in the Sankhya system of evolution or of creation. So the chit, or the sentient part, the jivatmas, the infinite souls, right? So he just described the modifications that occur to Prakriti or material nature. So obviously, the material nature goes through some changes, right? So it's not changeless. And Chit also has changes, right? The sentient part, which also lies in Brahman during Pralaya, right? So remember we talked about four stages of consciousness. We have the waking, we have the sleeping, we have the deep sleeping, and we have the transcendental stage. So we have this in Pralaya, the souls, right, are in a state which is called Sushupti, right, or it's the fourth state of consciousness, like that, and they are practically unconscious when the destruction of the universe goes on. The bound souls in this material world, then again they go into those other states of consciousness. So the Chit, or the sentient part, which also lies in Brahman during Pralaya, is indistinguishable or insignificant, so much so that it may be said not to exist at all, but becomes associated with Prakriti in the gross or Sthula form state in accordance with its past karma, and is seen as the self in gods, men, animals, plants, and so on, right? And let us remember that Brahman is the inner self of Chit and Achit, of the jiva, the souls, and matter, both in their subtle and in their gross state. The sentient being, Chit, right, the soul, right, thus enclosed in a body, enjoys and experiences pains and pleasures due to samsara, to this karma, which is making him go round and round, birth, death, disease, and old age, right? While the swarupa of Brahman, the essential nature of Brahman, the substantive, which is the Chit, which has Chit as its body, remains changeless and unaffected by the sorrows of the latter, right? So the Supreme Lord, who is also the soul of the soul, right? He isn't affected by that. Whereas the soul gets affected by that due to its ignorance, because when it becomes associated with gross matter, either gross or subtle matter, right? It, according to its karma, right, takes on these different bodies and has these different experiences of pain and pleasure and birth and death. And therefore it's affected. It's affected by that, right? Because it's conscious. So its consciousness is affected, like that. Okay. So we are now in a position to understand Ramanuja's interpretation of what is stated as Sad Vidya. Sad Vidya. Vidya means knowledge, and Sad means eternal knowledge, which Advaitins consider as strongly supporting their doctrine. So the Advaitins, they think that the Upanishadic doctrine they understand their Upanishadic doctrine. Right, so this, my dear, existed before as Sat, alone and without a second. This is the statement in the Upanishads. So how does Ramanuja understand this? This is the text in question. Before, says Ramanuja, means during Pralaya, right? Before the creation, what was there? There was another creation, but in between that other creation and now this new creation, there's what we call Pralaya. There's the part where there is no creation, where matter is in a very subtle form, right? Shukshma dasa, and the souls are in Sushupti, right? They're also in a very subtle form, right? And therefore, this is what he says, Ramanuja says, in the Sadvidya means before. So this, my dear, existed before as Sat, alone without a second. The text in question, before, says Ramanuja, means during Pralaya. This means, of course, the world of Chit and Achit, the world of sentient and insentient things. Sat, eternality, which Advaitins say means pure existence or Satyam or Brahman, means, according to Ramanuja, Brahman along with Chit and Achit in their subtle state. So what does it mean when this Vidya, or this statement from the Upanishad, says that there was only one? It means, yes, there was only one. There was Brahman along with Chit and Achit, the souls and the matter, which were in their subtle state. So they were practically imperceivable, right? So Sat does not mean pure and mere existence. For in other Upanishads, the same sentence occurs with substitutes like Atma or self, Brahman, or even Narayana, right? For Sat, right? So it refers to the supreme, Sat meaning eternality, right? So for the supreme being with attributes, so it refers to the supreme being with attributes. So that one that existed, that Sat, which only existed, that Sat has attributes, can have attributes. What are the attributes? Chida, Chit, Vishishta. They are the attributes of the individual souls, and matter, which are the attributes of Sriman Narayana, or Brahman, of Supreme Brahman. So for immediately after the Shruti says, it will to become many. It will to become many. The one became many, right? Then follows a description of Shristi, or creation. So in context, in the actual context, the Advaitins, they misunderstand because they pull one sentence out. This is the sentence which they pull out, right? They pull out this sentence which says, this, my dear, existed before Sat, as Sat, alone and without a second. And they say, okay, we're pulling that out and we're saying, okay, only Sat exists. It only exists. Before, Ramanuja says, means in Pralaya. In Pralaya, yes, it appears there's only God and there's no souls and there's no universe, because those things haven't been manifested. The souls are in Sushupti, deep sleep, right? Transcendental, sort of almost very subtle deep sleep. And the matter is in Pradhana, is in a conglomerate stage, a very Shukshma Dasa stage, a very subtle stage in Pralaya, right? So that practically seems like it doesn't exist, but these still are attributes of the Supreme Lord. They're attributes of Brahman. So Sriman Narayana's attributes are the souls and the universe, and they always are his attributes. And then after, this talks about before, and then the next sentence in the Upanishad goes on to say what happens after, and that says, after it willed to be many, and that was the creation. At the time of creation, it willed to be many, and therefore the souls went through the different changes, were associated with bodies in this material world, gross and subtle, and therefore have their consciousness changes. And the matter changes because it evolves into so many different forms and mixtures. So it willed to become many. Then follows a description of Shristi, or creation. So willing to become many. Will is ascribed by the Shruti itself to Sat. Sat has will. The eternal Brahman has a will. He has a desire. He desires, he wills the creation to happen in this very passage, which is considered a support to support the Advaita doctrine of Brahman without attributes. So the Advaitins, even though they say that this first sentence, right, shows that Brahman has no attributes, the very next sentence says that that thing without attributes actually willed something to happen, or wanted something to happen. That willing is an attribute, right? That thinking, feeling, willing is an attribute. If Brahman does that, it has those attributes. It willed to become many. So they say that supports oneness, but Ramanuja points out that they're not taking the whole context. They're not taking the second sentence into consideration, which still says that the Supreme Lord or Supreme Brahman willed there to be many. And then that caused creation. So this naturally leads us to another passage in the Chandogya Upanishad, chapter 6, where Sadvidya, right, is taught by his father to Swetaketu. So Swetaketu is a rishi there, and he has a father, and his father is telling him, the father asks at the beginning of the chapter whether Swetaketu asked his teachers about that, by knowing which everything else becomes known. So Swetaketu, did you ask your teachers about what you can know, by which knowing that one thing, you can know everything? Swetaketu does not know how, by knowing one thing, all things could be known, and the father afterwards explains his meaning to Swetaketu. The Advaitins explain the meaning of this passage thus: Brahman, being the only reality, when it is known, all other things become known, because they are only illusory appearances which have no reality. That's what the Advaitins say. Since no other reals exist, by knowing Brahman, all is known. Swetaketu finds it difficult to understand this. So the father says, the Advaitin gives the illustration, these illustrations to explain the statement as follows. When you know a single lump of clay or mud, right, all things made of clay or mud are known, such as pots and pitchers or dishes, right? For all changes and modifications are mere forms and names, but have no reality. Only the clay or the mud is real. So that's what Swetaketu's father says. The passage in the Shruti says that the Advaitin means that Brahman alone is real, like the clay or mud in the illustration, and that other things which are superimposed on it are mere forms and names having no reality. Ramanuja denies that the original statement and the clay or mud illustration which follows it are a statement of a Advaitic doctrine of Brahman being the only real. His explanation of the passage is to this effect. Swetaketu is here taught the truth that Brahman, with Chit and Achit as his body, with the souls and the universe as his body, is the subtle state, in the subtle state of pralaya, that is before creation, right? Destruction before creation, gives rise to the Brahman with Chit and Chit in their gross state, namely the world of souls and universes and matter that we see now, right? The former is the material cause. The former is the material cause, the upadana karana. Karana means cause, upadana means the material, the cause, the material cause, right? Right, from which arises the effect or the karya, namely the world of Brahman with Brahman as its inner self. What the father teaches the son is this: when Brahman, the cause, is known, the effect, namely the world of Chit and Achit, the souls and the universe, with Brahman as its soul, is also known. For that the effect, karya, is only the cause, karna, with new states, forms, and names which enable it to serve certain practical purposes. This does not deny the reality of the world. Pots and pitchers and plates and everything made of clay or mud are modifications and new states of clay or mud with new forms and names and serving certain new purposes. But as a substance, they are only clay and mud, and are not essentially different from the clay or mud, which has only entered a new state or condition. So in the beginning, there was the Supreme Brahman with Chit and Achit in a subtle situation, as in after Pralaya, right? After the destruction, before creation, right? The souls were in Sushupti, the subtle sleep. And so matter was also in a subtle state, Shukshmadasa, right? So they were all there. All those things were there. And now they're also there. They're also always there. So they haven't changed in the sense that they were always there. And now they're also always there.
Om Namo Narayanaya. Om